Greetings, listeners. Welcome to How the World Should Work, the podcast with a purpose, where we talk about things that actually matter. This is your host speaking, author, journalist, and otherwise aimlessly wandering millennial, Matt Shao. I'll be hosting alongside my good friend Johnny here. As many in my generation can probably relate to, and many who aren't, I spent several years after college trying to navigate the endlessly frustrating world of business to carve out what I was told was a successful life for myself. 6 years in the insurance industry, followed by a year of owning a small business, made me feel like I was on a decent track. Until August the 4th, 2015, when my world was turned upside down. That was the day I lost my mother and best friend, and suddenly every priority of mine completely shifted. I began to look at life from a totally different angle, and as a result, decided to drop everything and pursue writing. A dream my mother had pushed me towards my entire life, but one I was always too scared to chase. Fast forward 2 years, and I'm now a published author, a columnist at my local newspaper, an ever-growing blogger, and now we have a podcast. Which brings me to the point at hand. Here you'll be listening to topics pulled from various themes and motifs from my main writing project, the Continuity series. Although the primary purpose, as with any work of fiction, is to entertain, it also serves as a platform to express many of the thoughts and feelings we all seem to have with this crazy world we're living in. From deeper issues like social equality to lighter things such as modern dating, we'll be covering a wide array of things that we all seem to think about but don't seem to talk about very frequently. So with all that said, allow me to introduce our co-host, Mr. Gentleman Johnny Wiggins.
My name is Jonathan Wiggins. I've decided to join this project because I truly believe in what it stands for. Our goal here isn't to use this as a soapbox, so all you can just hear us talk. Instead, we hope that by talking about these issues, we can help create a better awareness of the things that affect our lives. By talking about these issues that we otherwise tend to ignore, I think we'll get a much better understanding of them, which can help us apply this newfound understanding to our lives in a meaningful way.
Alright, episode 5. We are going to be talking about the current state of our society in general. We're probably going to stick mainly to America because I think it's most applicable to that, and the majority, obviously, of our listeners are American. But we're going to be talking about the divisive culture that we currently deal with and exist in, some of the mechanisms that we think that cause it, and then some of the things possibly that we could do to improve it and look and move more towards a unified society just in general. But first, just a couple housekeeping things. I wanted to mention a couple updates that we've got. This is obviously a work in progress, so we've got a lot of moving parts, but we now have a mechanism for membership. So we're going to open this, and this is for anybody in any level of interest that would like to either get updates, emails of updates like the podcast episodes and everything, but any way that, we've created a membership form, which is on our website. It's at on the top menu on the right. It's a howtheworldshouldwork.com is our website, and there's a membership form, just basic info it asks for, and then, obviously the email address and whatnot, and there's a tab that asks if you'd be interested in possibly volunteering once we set up events and whatnot with partnered organizations. So we're excited about that, a way to get everyone else involved. We are also now, our podcast is on YouTube, youtube.com/howtheworldshouldwork. We would love it if you subscribe, if you're listening on iTunes, if you're listening on YouTube, definitely like, comment, subscribe, everything, would be wonderful. That would really help us out. And the last thing, we are looking at ways right now to, besides the obvious things like grants and whatnot we can apply for as a nonprofit, but we'd like to have some sort of way to fund, as many sources of funding as possible without, coming out of pocket too much. But so we're going to start offering apparel. We're probably going to use teespring.com, but we right now are in the process of designing it. So we're going to open this up, and we're going to, post this on social media to everybody. If you guys could, any of you creatives out there, could come up with maybe one-liners that would look good or sound good on a t-shirt, Like, for example, we were toying around with it, and one we just threw out there was time for change, hashtag how the world should work. So that's just kind of an example. So anybody that comes up with something that we end up using, we're going to send a free t-shirt to you in the mail, as a thank you for the participation in the input. So, having said that, that's all of the updates, at least for now, and I'd like to get into this. So I'm going to try to direct this kind of in a particular, to stay on point here. So the basic kind of bullet points we're going to talk about here are the following. What is the current status quo? What is our life like today? What kind of culture are we living in? I don't think many people would argue with the fact that we live in a very combative, divisive world. We've seen a lot of depressing headlines, especially here lately, and so that's where are we at today? That's our first thing, and I want to segue after that into how have we gotten there? Like what mechanisms contribute to that kind of culture? What things are causing it? Racism, for example, religion, gender, disconnect, so a lot of different things. I mean, again, moving parts to this, and what's created such a emphasis on those things, and I think for example, the media has a lot to do with it. So what kinds of things make all of like the racism, the gender? Why is that such a priority and such a sensitive point that we all seem to fight about? Like, what's keeping us from really getting along? And next, I want to talk about what's currently being done about this, if anything. So we'll leave that open. But and then finally, we're going to end with what can we actually do? What else can be done if anything is being done? What else can, because it's clearly not enough. Because here we are, probably as divided as ever. So as always, the way that this applies to the continuity series, honestly, that's really what the whole series is about. Continuity, as the name implies, the ultimate storyline is the continuity of our species as humanity. I know only the first book is out right now, but it's going to be a series of 3, and that's without giving too much out, and I don't even mind if that plot point, because I think that's pretty clear, based on the title. That's what the whole story is about, is continuity, and the majority of it focuses on that next cultural evolution of unifying. It's basically, the story is about us outgrowing this ridiculously antiquated mentality we have of throwing sticks and stones at each other, and moving forward and expanding and essentially growing up as a species. So, as always, again, I'm going to read, and in fact, there's a couple quotes, or a few quotes actually, because I googled quotes on Unity, and there were so many good ones, I had to include these, but so the first one was Maddie Stepanek. It's, Unity is strength. When there is teamwork and collaboration, wonderful things can be achieved. I'm assuming this is an ancient Greek guy. Publius Cyrus. That's an awesome name. I'll have to, where there is unity, there is always victory. Manuel Cleaver, there's more power in unity than division. FDR, President Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the point in history at which we stand is full of promise and danger. The world will either move toward unity and widely shared prosperity, or it will move apart. And then the last couple, Ralph Waldo Emerson, I'm a huge fan of his. He said, the reason why the world lacks unity and lies broken and in heaps is because man is disunited with himself. And then the last one is by William Butler Yeats, and I really liked this one. Talent perceives differences, genius unity. So let's get into the chat here. So let's talk about the status quo. Let's talk about where we are today. And we have with us again Chad Grindstaff. He joined us last week with our terrorism episode. Johnny's back today. He was in New York City last week, so let's welcome Johnny back.
Hey guys.
And then Will is here, and Johnny's nephew, actually, Ryan, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Ryan is here as well. So let's start. I'm going to start with our guest, Chad. What is your take on today's, just in general, where are we at today in terms of division and unity as a human, as a collective?
It's pretty bad. I think the typical response would be pretty accurate. I mean, politicians speak divisively, media speaks divisively, and social media seems to incubate that whole thing, so it just kind of gets worse and worse.
Festers and yeah.
It's a good climate for divisive.
Social media. Oh man, the playground of all things decrepit and evil and wonderful and disgusting about humanity, right? The old internet warriors that can hide behind a keyboard and say whatever they want and never... Speaking of which, sorry, side note, Harvard, I read an article today, took away that they approved
memes.
they had approved
that.
Their applications and all that. So Harvard has this thing on their, I guess, Facebook or whatever, their social media, where they create for incoming freshmen a group where they can create special interests and whatever. And these geniuses decided to create groups like racist groups, some like making light in an article that said of like pedophilia and making absurd comments publicly, like their names are associated with it. And they kicked out 10 people. So let's applaud Harvard, so good for them for standing up for something and setting a precedent there that, is really in line with how the world should actually work. So, good job, Harvard. Chad, is there anything else you want to add about how you view today? I obviously there's probably not much really needs to be said. I'm going to ask all of you, but is there anything else you want to add about that? Any particular experiences maybe that you've had with this kind of? I see the entertaining Facebook threads.
Yeah. that's a learning experience all on its own. It just kind of how to navigate it, if it's worth it, if it's not worth it. I believe in conversation, but sometimes it just goes into a place where it's,
pointless.
It stops being pointless, and I can be quite cynical as well. So it's easy for me to go there and kind of become the troll that I don't like. So
it's good though. I really appreciate the fact that you have enough conviction to where you actually get bothered about these things. I think that is something you care. We mentioned this last week, and I think that's something we need more of, whether or not it's troll-like or whatever you want to call it. I don't think you should live under a bridge. I think you should live in a mansion, personally.
Thank you.
But Ryan, do you want to add anything to that? Is there anything maybe? You're in high school, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm sure we'll have some things with you later, that come up. Johnny, what about you? What about you? What do you think now? And have you had any personal experience with these kinds of things?
I see kind of both sides. There is a lot of division, especially in today's United States, but at the same time, I see a lot of unity, groups coming together to fight for a cause, and you see more and more of that every day. So there are two sides of everything,
right?
And I've kind of seen both, and a lot in the media here lately. Of course, you have people that are hate groups and such, and then you have those other groups that actually stand for something and that are fighting these those other groups. So yeah.
So adversity, you're saying, basically brings out the best and the worst.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Have you had any personal experiences with these kinds of... And I hate to say this, but this is just me being perfectly candid. We're white males in America. We don't have to deal with a lot of the things that other demographics have to deal with. So I think we should definitely be mindful of that. I'm not saying you know, that situation is exploited sometimes, you know. There is a limit to the pity, you know, card that people can play, but I do, you know, it is something that we just simply can't even comprehend that perspective a lot of times because we simply aren't in it.
Right.
So it makes sense if you guys haven't really had, you know, much personal experience with it. But Will, what about you? Same questions.
I think honestly, it kind of adds on to what Johnny said, that it's definitely, there's a split. I think in a way we're a lot more cohesive than we like to think we are. Cause,
you think so?
Oh, I mean, like I said, it's a split, and it's going to sound weird how I explain it, but if you think about it, we're combative as hell. Yeah, no, we're arguing about everything. We're at each other's throats about everything, but it's always in groups. It's never just one person just going off the rails against, you know.
It's a unique way to look at it.
There's two sides to everything, like you said. So yeah, no, as a whole, we're always fighting, you know, because the differing opinions are always going to be there. But the fact that we do have the ability to stand together on the different opinions is kind of what helps us stay as a cohesive working unit sometimes.
That's a really, like, yeah. I mean, it's a point, you know, definitely a valid point. Yeah. It's just funny to think about it that way because it's like, you're right, it's like, I want to fight, but I want to fight with somebody.
And we definitely also, we live in a world that kind of will pick a side. You know, kind of looks at you and says that, like, you.
And we're gonna. That's part actually of the part. You know, we will talk about that and how it is kind of instinctual.
Yeah.
As a competitive species, you know, that we do that, and that's really the thing. It's like. Ultimately, you know, we'll talk about it at the end, but ultimately the only thing that we're going to be able to do, because that's never going to change the combat, there will always be a need for an enemy, I feel like.
Yeah.
I don't think that's ever going to... So it's like, how do we understand that characteristic in humanity and manipulate it to a point where we can, like, at least maximize the level of unity that we have, you know? But that's a good point. Yeah. I'm not laughing at the. I'm just. It is funny.
I was laughing at.
Yeah, of course you were.
Okay, well Johnny was.
In like 4 days, and we're just right back.
Yeah, welcome back to Tennessee, Johnny.
We missed you. Go back to New York.
Speaking of the whole division, speaking of divisiveness, Will and Johnny have that component here. It illustrates well in the dynamic here. You know.
What? Don't.
There's unity, you know, collectively, but there's that. No, I'm just kidding.
Which goes to your point.
That's exactly right, you know? That's exactly right. And then I've got to play both sides, you know? And it's like, I got to... You know.
No, you have to pick one.
I have to according to the world, I do, I guess. All right, so let's talk about the next thing. What mechanisms... Why is it like that? You know, how have we gotten to this point? What components contribute to that status quo? And I'm just going to start out, you know, to get the ball rolling on it, just if it helps. The points I had put written down, kind of the main ones, I think. Race is obviously a big one. That's been since the dawn of time. You know, racism has always existed in our species. Politics, a very clear one. I mean, very obvious. You know, there's always one side or the other. It's the right versus the left, the Republicans versus the Democrats, you know, and then the Libertarians trying to be like, hey, yeah, chill out, whatever. But, you know, and then you've obviously got the stances on specifics when it comes to politics. You've got, you know, what people think about this Muslim ban. You've got Middle Eastern intervention. You've got gay rights, religious right. You've got all these moving parts to this big, you know, and then religion is another big one. Mm-hmm. You know, this whole Islamophobia thing going on. Is it justified? Is it not? Is it judgmental? Like, this whole thing is a very complicated thing, and this is really the overarching, I think, this is really the main probably topic in our entire discussions that, you know, the majority of our talks even boil down to, so... Chad, what do you think? What do you, if you want to elaborate on those points or add more, what do you think? How have we gotten to this point?
I mean, if you look into the past, there's plenty of injustices been done to all kinds of different groups of people, some worse than others, some more clear-cut, worse than others. And to me, just as summing it up, it's injustices and the people trying to cope with that.
Cope in terms of...
Right. right wrongs of history, and there's methods of ways to do that. But as I see it, it's the idea of collectivism kind of growing and growing, and so that reinforces a very tribalism.
Right. Yeah.
And so, because the rhetoric becomes more intense, and I think
Kind of retaliatory,
it's
which causes the whole that widens the gap. It's like if you're oppressing people, they want to respond in kind, and it just nobody's ever like, hey, time out, chill, let's get along. It's always one side or the other, right?
Yeah, which I think the conversation is good to have, but I'm a conservative, which basically means my political stance is all damage control. It's like viewing human nature. I see human nature as a certain kind of thing, and so it's instead of forcing people to do something, it's more about like, what all can I not do to kind of keep things afloat. So it's an individual kind of stance, and I see really collectivism is kind of, to me, it doesn't help itself. I feel like it seeks out to unify, but ends up really tearing people apart.
Okay, that's
I
a unique.
The factions become a lot more rigid.
Yeah. Let me, just so I can wrap my head around that, because that's actually a valid point. So you're saying the very fact, the fundamental, fact that people have differences of opinions mean that they probably are better off apart, rather than clashing if you're trying to force them to come together. Is that kind of what you're saying?
As much as possible. Like, my biggest, as a conservative, I want to keep power, I want to keep government power down to a minimal. My big olive branch to a more collectivist type of a thinker is states' rights. I'm like, okay, like, if you'll take what you want to do on the federal level and chill it out a little bit, even if I don't like it, try it out at a smaller level and experiment a little bit.
There's a hip hop song, right? And I believe the lyrics of Wise Man, it said, "You do you, I'ma do me," right? Who was that? Wise words, isn't it? Is that kind of what you're saying? Like,
pretty much. Yeah.
I agree. I like the idea of locally centralized, governments. We mentioned that, I think, in one of ours. Tribal is, almost like that. But you're right. I mean, that would allow. I disagree as well with the federal and high level oversight and the dictating. I mean, dictators. It's kind of what it is. They're dictating, the way that you should live, and I agree. Who's to say that they're the authority? Right. People should be able to decide that on their own. So, what do you think, Johnny? What do you think? How have we gotten so combative? How have we gotten so aggressively divided?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what it is that we're talking about. But, I mean, you look at, like, race. Like, no one is born being a racist. So there's, at some point in their growing up and the teachings of their parents or influence of their friends or whatnot, that their mind kind of gets it changes, and instead of like, oh, they're human, now it's, oh, well, now I'm judging them based on their skin color, or, their religion, whatever. So I think it has a lot to do with just the education and what they absorb.
The environment they're raised in. Nature versus nurture, it's the nurturing. Yeah, you're right.
That's exactly right. A lot to do with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you think people should inherently or are inherently good? It's just a product. We're a product of our environment,
pretty much.
Which somehow, has developed bad. So yeah, I think that's a good point. Will, what about you?
Well, Johnny basically. I was gonna say, and I have more to add on to this. I was gonna say, I think at this point, what's brought us to where we are now is our history. Is the fact that throughout human history we've had points of mass, just extreme racism. Like, you've got the Holocaust, the Jews in Rome and Egypt, and you've got Jews pop up a lot. Sorry,
Sakari. I mean, the OTs, man. We mentioned that last week. It's like
you've got, and then you've got the civil rights movement, and you've got the history of slaves throughout the world.
Yeah.
I mean, racism has been there, and racism has been a big historical thought. And like you said, when you're brought up with it, when you're brought up to hate somebody who's gay or hate somebody who's black or Asian or hate some, I see it. Or when you're brought up to not like these things or not approve of them, yeah, you're gonna kind of stick with the mindset that, well, if this is what all my peers think, then yeah, this is probably...
It's difficult to break that mold, yeah.
It is. But I think in today's world, I feel like we are connected enough that kind of upbringing should kind of... I mean, it should... I think just the collective mindset outside of a family should be able to override that. Because I feel like on a human level, you're intelligent enough to understand that maybe they're not right, but the mass of people outside is.
It's like last week when we were talking about right and wrong.
Yeah, no. Well, and that was actually my add-on, was the fact that it social media makes it, I mean, just that much worse. Because, I mean, you think about it, the second one person's got something to say, if the right person likes it enough, it explodes into a firestorm of whatever, good or bad. It could be either way.
No, you're right.
But,
you're right.
Yeah.
For the intent, it's ironic because it was intended for Zuckerberg, obviously Facebook's the primary player here.
Oh, and Twitter.
But, that is precisely the opposite of what he intended.
Yeah, no.
And it has made such a great impact on the world and such a terrible impact. It's made people so cynical, really. And
sometimes you gotta wonder what
I mean, it's probably caused divorces, to be honest. And it's because it's just absurd. But I want to rewind for a second there and go back to, and this is slightly off topic here, but something I think everybody should watch. It's a movie. You mentioned the Holocaust.
Yeah.
There's a movie I saw recently called Conspiracy. And all it is, have you guys heard of the Wannsee Conference? So that was this version of the Nazis, right?
Oh.
Whoever the Nazi was that was like, this is the way it should work.
Okay, gotcha.
Did this thing. They didn't have a podcast, obviously, but they kept it behind closed doors. But it's the movie. All it is the Wannsee Conference, which they wouldn't even know about if it weren't for one small document that was the minutes. And it was like 15, I think, of the highest level, like the SS guys, all of the branches, the government, and they got together and discussed the Jewish problem, the final solution, quote, that we're all familiar with. That's the conference that it gave its birth, and it is the most fascinating, horrifying discussion, and it's brilliant acting, and it is these guys hanging out, drinking, smoking, being bros, hanging out, whilst talking about literally killing 10 million people. It's nothing, like they're vermin, and that's kind of what we're up against with a lot of with what is going on in the world and how it's controlled.
I just want to... Last week you compare us to ISIS, saying this is probably how ISIS started, and this week we're a Nazi group.
Nah, I'm saying, my point is that we need to be mindful of that. When we... It's important, because that's... My point is the fact that the world is literally controlled by people who do this and talk about that. So what the world really needs is people who do this and talk about this.
Right. Yeah.
They talk about how to be fair, and they scheme, if you want to call it that, and plot or whatever on how to dominate the world in a good way. Like, we need a group that's trying to make things fair. Right.
Yeah.
Because it is. I mean, it's a movie, but that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you take into consideration like Nixon, for instance. Like so we kind of started the war on drugs, and his biggest opponent for the race was African Americans and Mexican people, and they were trying to figure out a way that they could, because that was their biggest problem. Try a way to I guess what's the word I'm looking for?
Stamp it out.
Yeah, stamp it out. So they made the war on drugs, because African Americans back then huge on marijuana.
Right.
And same with the Latino people. So that's what they did. They started putting these people in jail and reducing the population.
And look at the incarceration things we talked about
Yeah.
in that institutional episode.
It was like 200.
You're right. You're exactly right. Well, and it's ironic because all these politicians and rich guys are doing hard drugs that are like,
Yeah.
and what are the penalties for that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly right. That is precisely an illustration of what is wrong with the world, and it's sad. I mean, and it's a big problem, man. It's extremely daunting when you look at it that way. It's like what we're really up against. We need some team players that really give a that care enough to be able to go up against that and fight fire with fire, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, anything else on that you guys want to add on how we've gotten to this point? I think we've covered the majority of the big players. Race. What about it? Do you think, Chad? Do you think religion plays a big component of this?
Laziness in it, probably.
In turn, what do you mean?
Well, like even just in a philosophical sense, I feel that what we talked about last week, even in Western culture, it can, while great in providing liberty kind of can expose the more apathetic nature in people or laziness. And so over time, it's like, for instance, like I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up with some kind of under certain beliefs, and then mommy and daddy are great, but then I grow up and I go off to school and I learn all these different kinds of things, and it's like, and then I kind of like, okay, well, what do I do with all these kind of conflicting ideas? And why am I why was I born into the right situation? Why this? Why that? And kind of go through this whole like crisis of identity and kind of guilt. And
emotional overload.
And I think a lot of the way people deal with guilt is you'll watch somebody, if they grow up in a really extreme situation, a lot of times they will jump ship and swim all the way to the other ship that's on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And so and kind of like it's really like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So like that's really lazy thinking in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's like okay, instead of just throwing away everything that my parents felt like was good for me, why don't I just set this aside real quick, observe some things for myself and kind of intake and really hash out some ideas. And that's why I think conversations like this are so good, is because then you get to really kind of expose ideas and put them in the ring and see what comes out is a good idea, moving forward. And what's happened is a lot in Christianity and in politics, like conservatives have no idea for the most part why they're conservative. Mm-hmm. And they can't explain it except for a couple of small things, and you'll see conservatives backing things that aren't even conservative, and it's a very frustrating thing as a conservative.
But that apply. I will say this just in terms of fairness. That applies. That's not even a conservative. That's a human thing.
Sure.
People are, like Johnny was saying, it's like, and like Will, your brother Michael was saying last week, it's structure. It's something, it's what you've just learned. I mean, this is the way this is what I've known, I don't know why I think this. I just know that everyone else thinks it, and that's what I think now. So I think that is a good point. But I mean, and you understand it in the context of conservatism, because that's what you are. But that does apply, to everyone,
Yeah.
But I love the point that you just made.
I like that.
It's just like,
what do I
generation to generation? It kind of like, if you don't think for yourself, in other words, like Jordan Peterson, who I've watched his stuff to death, or read him, but he always talks about Pinocchio. Like, if you don't become a real boy, if you don't have your own original thought, then essentially you're just a puppet with no ideas, and
it's good.
Puppets breed puppets.
Yeah, and I think ultimately the immediate effect that I think the very long term goal, and I'm just going to be perfectly honest here, if everything were to work out, and this could be 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, I don't care, but the only thing that's really going to change the world is a shift in the way that we view it. and a shift in the way that we perceive each other and our own opinions and predispositions. And that's got a big part about what Chad just said. And that's going to require the population to have that critical thinking ability. So we're going to have to try and make an effort to instill that in people and provide them with different viewpoints and the purposes behind these viewpoints so people can do what you just said and consider and take the good from this part with the good of this part. And, you know, what does he say in Happy Gilmore? Harness the good, block out the bad, you know, and do that. You know, that would be the... Again, I love the point you just made when you just said, because we've all felt like that. I think, like, what do I do with this? It's like,
Absolutely.
it's like sensory overload with all of these different things. And I experienced that when I went to college. That was my main point. It's like I grew up in very at the time pretty rural. I mean, it was Mount Juliet. And we had a very rigid culture there. I mean, and then when I went to Vanderbilt, I was introduced to all these people from the north and from California, like so many different viewpoints. And like, I was like, dang, things really don't work the way I thought they did, because I'd grown up in this little town in Tennessee. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of soul searching there. So, anything else you guys want to add on that?
I was wanting to say that.
Yeah.
You said, like, religion, that's a big thing. It is, because me personally, I've seen where I have friends that have become different religions during school, and the backlash that they get personally just from everyone else is extreme.
Yeah, and that's sad. I think it's sad that I think family is probably the easiest way to describe that situation. Like when you grow up and fly to coop and that happens. For example, you change religion. Let's say that, and your family shuns you for it. That violates the purpose of family. The purpose of family isn't to dictate and control. It's to support and love and to promote. So self-discovery, and that is again that's a human problem. People.
Oh yeah.
I don't know why, but we for some reason we don't like it when people disagree with us, and I think we need to change that. That has to change. It has to change.
At least accepting it. I don't think we're ever gonna like it.
Yeah, no.
But appreciate that they're an individual person.
Right.
Like, what if I thought the same thing of you, mom or dad, or your brother?
We gotta find a middle ground somewhere and just agree to disagree at some point.
We have to get over ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what it is. We have to get over our own lack of perspective for appreciating other people's points of view. All right, so let's go into all of these things we just talked about. Right? They create division. Now, what I want to talk about is why. Why do we care, for example, what color somebody's skin is? Why do we care and that kind of, goes along the same point that we were just talking about. Why do we care what religion you are? Why do we care so much about these things when they violate my point of view? Who cares? Why? What do you think causes that? And I can start out with some bullet points if you want me to. My main one, and I capitalized every single letter, was the media.
Okay,
the media, to me, directs, sadly, so much of our thoughts. It's literally mind control, for lack of a better term. And then I also put, corrupt world leaders who promote these division, this divisive, who benefit from the chaos. Of course they want a problem between the peons, because that lets them pull the strings behind the scenes and no one's paying attention. That sounds like a conspiracy theorist, but I don't care. That's how the world is actually functioning. And then I think a lot of it's human nature. Again, we're a competitive species, and we prefer to, be validated with our points of view, and we don't like when people challenge us. So, Chad, can you take it from there?
Well, to qualify this, what I'm about to say, I do want to say, in America specifically, racism took a really sadistic turn with
in America, you mean?
With black people specifically.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, and there's been other things that's happened, of course, but in America that's terrible concerning race, but that really specifically really took a dark turn with the justification used with Christianity. However, I actually tend to think that people aren't good by nature.
Really?
I don't think that we're born with this like
Wired
with the
goodness.
core of who we are is like good. I think there's a battle there for sure, but I think in the West and we really do take for granted the where we came from in a sense of the morality laid out like and I do think like I would think that people are probably more inclined to be racist just at a very evolutionary kind of tribalist kind of
I agree.
core part of who we are, and it's like a part of us that has to be overcome or taught, kind of like learning to share when you're a kid, and it's just stuff like that. There's like things that you have to deal with in little kids, I think, that are not good and that have to be they have to be overcome as a bad part of our nature.
Yeah.
And
I agree with that completely, actually. As idealistic as I try to be, like Carson, I explained I like to think of things that way and from an idealistic point of view, but at the end of the day, I mean, we're animals. I mean, we are animals, and what do you see in the animal kingdom? So you're right. Like Johnny was saying, people do what they're taught. So we need to create that culture. We need to create a culture where it's normal and good and cool to be good. You know,
Right.
We need to create a culture where you're not rewarded for being a jerk. You
Right.
know,
I believe totally in publicly shaming jerks.
I agree.
I
agree with that.
I think that's a great tool.
Yeah. I would love to be able to talk about some ways that we could do that, but for the sake of brevity in the conversation.
Those words will eat me someday. I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh no, not at all. One of these days we'll have the Chad Grindstaff Award for
God.
for being an ass or whatever you want to say, but so what else? Okay,
Ignorance,
so
honestly. Ignorance, honestly. Because some people, they just don't want to learn about other stuff, and they don't want to learn about other people's
so
opinions.
willful in ignorance, then. Yeah.
difficult.
Yeah. So you're saying like people don't even want to get along, basically.
Yeah, like some people, they just don't want to learn other people's opinions because they just don't want it to conflict with themselves personally or internally.
That's a very good point. Right now, we've got two candidates for MVC, the most valuable comment of the evening. Chad's whole juggling with all the overload of perspective, and then that. I think that's a really good point because that is a human problem. Again, it's ego.
Mm-hmm.
Again, most of our problems come from our egos and our who likes to be wrong.
Right.
You know, so yeah, fundamentally, we don't want to hear other points of view because there's a danger that we're gonna be wrong.
I think the best way to
Very
look
good
at
comment.
look at a problem is to take yourself out of the situation and be able to put yourself into their shoes too.
Yeah.
You know, look at it from their side as well as your side, and keep both of those in consideration, and then from there you can see the answer a lot more clearly.
But honestly, it's funny because we had a similar discussion last night on a personal level. We, based on an experience when we went out, but I'm not gonna broadcast that for the world to hear. But it had, when you're in a situation and you have a friend, for example, that sees it from the third person outside looking in, how easy is it for that same friend to act the same way when it's happening to him? Because it's so hard to do that. Because there's so many other things. You've got emotion. You've got, but logically, if you look at it, it all makes sense. But again, we're human at the end of the day. So you're right. That's what we should be doing. That's how the world should work. But that's really difficult. Perspective, and I'm really glad you said that because that's actually the title of the poem at the very end that I'm going to read. It's called Perspective because that's what this all boils down to is perspective. We view things from our own. So how do we do it from the other guys? But Will?
I think part of it, again, I mean, we've said this a lot, so I'm not saying anything new here, would be coming down to we are being impressed upon by former generations and the people that are raising us to think, yes, this matters. This needs to be a hot button topic. This is something we need to bring up on a daily basis and blare across banners and tickets on the bottom and use,
from the top of a mountain.
Right, exactly. Okay. Light the signal fires, you know.
Light the fire of Gondor.
But
Tolkien, another great writer.
yeah.
Shout out. You know, I'm gonna go in the reverse, just to, because you're right. I think it's not fair to end with Will, because he's right. He's got that regurgitating.
Yeah.
So we'll start with you next.
Okay, that works.
But continue.
I can't think of anything else to say, to be honest.
I mean, that's probably the biggest point, really. I mean, it's what we're taught, it's what we know. So we ultimately could grow up caring about crap that really shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, but it always has. So it still does. So that's a great time, a good point to introduce our sponsor. No, I'm just kidding, Kofifi. You weren't here for that.
Nah, yeah.
Yeah, we talked about Kofi. The Kofifi, you heard about it? Yeah. It's a good time to go into our next point, which is, so we've discussed the problem. We've discussed why the problem exists. So now let's discuss what is being done currently about this problem. And I want to talk about the groups, Johnny, you mentioned earlier, the special interest groups, the advocacy groups, and then the combative group, you know. I want to discuss that because there's some really important points that we need to touch on. But what is being done about it currently? This whole divisive culture, you know. And again, since I've been doing it before, I'll start out with just the bullet points. There's a lot of complaining. I would say the majority of what's being done is the complaining. I mean, you know, you see people whining and crying on Facebook, you know, and whatever you want to do, but they're not really doing anything about it, you know, outside of putting up a Facebook status that, you know, just exacerbates their point of view, or emphasizes their point of view. Outside of that, I mean, there's the groups. I mean, you've seen the rise of special interest groups, the advocacy groups, and we'll talk about if that's a good or a bad thing and why. But Will, what do you think? What right now, in your opinion, is being done?
One thing that is being done is our celebrities are all getting up in a fuss about everything. So
in a good way or a bad way?
I think most of them are getting up in a good way.
What's an example?
Off the top of my head, I see there. You grab me with it. I don't
honestly, because
Yeah.
I think celebrities don't do the right thing mostly, in my opinion.
I think every time I see something about a celebrity, they're standing up for somebody. They're on the stage at the gay rights conventions, and they're you know trying to get their voices out there because they're the face they're the voice that'll be listened to because they're, you know, big and famous.
I can't think of one.
I see it a lot. It's usually the same group of people. Like
who?
It's singers a lot. Pink, that Ellen Page girl.
Ellen, I like her.
There are a few others. They're always showing up at places like that.
Ellen DeGeneres is a good one.
Ellen DeGeneres is a good one, yeah. But I don't know, Hollywood, they've really kind of stuck to trying to not be hateful kind of agenda.
I don't know.
Not that they're doing anything about it. I haven't seen anything out of Hollywood that's hateful or scandalous towards people. They're always trying to be peaceful and loving, and they're always on some sort of Snapchat something, and they're got their
I think they're good marketers.
They're good marketers.
I think they're good at knowing what people want to hear, but I also think they're excellent at being materialistic and standing in their private lives for absolutely nothing that they're broadcasting.
Yeah, that's because they're Hollywood.
And well, that's my point.
Yeah.
And that's not what we should be promoting. Fake, you know, manipulative rhetoric. I think. I think the sentiment is kind of exists there, but. You know, like Matt Damon has a water...
Ashton Kutcher's a perfect example.
He's a good one.
He's a good one. He's a good one. And there are others out there that are like him.
There are a handful of really, really good ones.
They're the ones that are getting stuff done because they've got the money to back it. And,
right.
You know, push all this stuff through. In the civilian life, though, just your normal run-of-the-day citizen who Joe Schmo doesn't have a voice, not much is happening other than, I mean... Once again, every day you see a picket sign on your Facebook feed, so there's that stuff's going on left and right, but that's not going to do much for it in the end other than just raise a row.
Yeah.
So.
And the question has to be raised of if you don't have the means of a platform like those celebrities, ultimately, what can be done. And at the same time, do their private lives even matter? I mean, if they're promoting the proper image or not. Like Kanye West is such a great... No, I'm just kidding.
Right, what a role model right there.
You know, but I don't know. Like, I would say on your point of celebrities that there's almost a culture in America now where it's like the world against Hollywood. Like, everyone, for the most part... Like, have you seen the commercials that, like during the biggest easiest way to illustrate this is the campaign. How they mostly stood for Hillary, and like how resentful the majority of the public was that even a lot of the people that were supporting Hillary, nobody liked the fact that there was such like a condescending approach to it. Like, you need to listen to us because we're Hollywood. You know, like there's a big feeling based on, you know, a lot of the things that I've read, at least, and that I've spent, you know, conversations, people feel like they have that mentality, a holier than thou mentality. And I think they're becoming aware of it, so they're kind of, you know, changing that. But I think that is definitely there's a huge disconnect, you know, because they live in a totally different world. They just really, it's impossible for them to comprehend what the majority of people go through, you know. But I agree. There are a handful of like super, really genuinely good people. You know, I would say Ellen DeGeneres, Emma Watson, which one day I'm gonna try harder than anything to marry. She's like an ambassador to the UN for women's rights. So, was there anything else you wanted to add on that?
That's really all I had.
Okay, Johnny, what about you? What do you think is being done?
Yeah, I'm sure there are all kinds of things that people are doing to combat this divisiveness. But one thing that I've seen is it's a lot more common, and you see it a lot more in today's times, where someone will call out someone for being racist or
Shaming.
Yeah, public shaming. Yeah, you see like those videos all the time that pop up, and yeah, I watched one yesterday where a guy was chanting racist slurs at a coffee shop, and the cops came up and arrested the guy on the spot right there, and then you have a whole crowd cheering. Yeah, because they did arrest him.
The wicked witch is dead kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think,
like Harvard, like, you know, so Harvard did it.
Yeah, so I think it's headed in the right direction, and it's good because you didn't used to see that a lot, and I started to see it more and more.
Yeah, so you're right.
That's one thing, anyway.
Is there anything else you think? What do you think? I think a lot of that, you know, honestly, has to do with the internet, and I always mention that the fact that the internet has given us the ability to expose ourselves to so many points of view. It's almost like society is very slowly beginning to work itself out. Like I said in a couple episodes, the Panama Papers, for example, WikiLeaks, all these groups that are like advocating the right thing and trying to live the right way, and the internet has given them a platform and the means to actually get it done, right, and get the message out. You know, because it's not controlled anymore by a couple or huge, you know, organizations. So that's a good point. I totally agree with that. Chad or Ryan and Chad, either one of you guys want to elaborate?
Honestly, if you think about it, there was not really a true right and wrong except for like now, because majority opinion. Yeah. But if you think about it, though, there's very few natural rights and wrongs, because most of it that's natural is just provided by like nature, like murder, like killing another thing. Mm-hmm. Not really seen as right within anything. Yeah. So now you're saying with the ability to maybe communicate, we've developed a better idea of right and wrong? Is it kind of sort of, but also it's made it where most of it's got twisted as well. Yeah. Because more people that could say lesser of a group, but more negative, like an ideal, have got higher up, and it can spread.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's actually, that's a perfect point to go into talk about groups, which we'll get. I want to give Chad a chance though first to, anything you want to add about what's being done currently?
I don't know. It's a tough question. For me, it's tough to say what's a good direction to go. I will say, while I like the exchange of ideas on on any sort of level, whether it's personal, public, or if two people can come together for the right heart and mind to share some thoughts, then I promote that. But Mark Duplass, I think that's how you say his name. You'd recognize him if you saw him. He's a kind of a Judd Apatow-ish kind of a guy. But he's
like a news
doing
guy, or what is he?
No, he's an actor.
Okay.
He
I know that.
he's
I'm looking.
I've been listening to him. He's shown up on some news outlets that I listen to, which tend to be more conservative. And that's actually one thing I was going to say is the promotion of like Facebook and Twitter. All these kind of things can really kind of spin you in on yourself, and they can start feeding you information because they know like our big 5 personality traits by things we
Johnny
like and
talks about
places
that.
we go.
Yeah.
And and so we end up consuming the same opinion.
Yeah.
So like it really takes a considerate effort to do that, and
Yeah, it's from the league.
yes,
Yeah, that's it. He
yeah.
looks like the guy from The Office, kind of too.
yeah.
In fact, that's not his brother, is it?
I don't know.
He has a brother in Hollywood too. That guy.
Are you talking about Jim?
Yeah.
Um,
Doesn't he look like him?
Joe, yeah.
but
Looks like a nice dude. Look at that smile.
yeah, he's like the nicest guy ever.
Yeah, you can
he
tell.
like went on some super hardcore rant on Twitter after Trump won, and then kind of like came to and was like, okay, all right, I'm not going to just sit here and Amber Alert.
I got that too.
Sorry, but he's been reaching out to people and really focusing on what it is that he has in common, and like he's been reaching out to people like Steven Crowder and Glenn Beck, and he's a really liberal person, but he's been reaching out, and like he ended up going to I don't know where it was, like Haiti or Africa, I'm not sure. Anyways, doing some sort of thing where he's like, you know, we could talk about abortion and be at each other's throats all day, all right? And he's like, we know that. Okay, we know that. Let's step by that and let's work together on something. And so that's kind of really where his focus is.
Good for him.
In on. Yeah, it's really refreshing because he it's very you can see him trying to fight it too if which is natural. Yeah.
You're right though. It's funny because it's so easy to beat a dead horse, and at a certain point, you just got to agree to disagree, and that's such a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, people have
Because
such
I'm
a
right.
need. Right, exactly, right? People have such a need, and again, it's ego. You have such a need to convince them and win and, like, just be right, you know? And the other person, what we have a difficult time absorbing is the other person's thinking the exact same thing. Okay, so before we move on about what we can do, we're going to talk about some of the groups and whatnot, and whether what they're doing, whether it's good or bad. But we're going to end it here for segment 1. Because we're probably going to post a 2-hour-long or ish uploads. So this is going to conclude the first segment. Thank you again for joining. And again, check out the website, howtheworldshouldwork.com. Fill out a membership form and get involved.